This is David Toulis, the smartest guy with a bow tie in Chattanooga, and I have a second prophet to hear from today, and his name is Dick Marple. He is the crankiest legislator in New Hampshire, the crankiest representative of the people in that small state, which has, as he assures me, the best representation of any of the 50 states we are the United States. And he had in the most recent General Assembly the Right to Travel Act. And when we chatted before, I'd asked for details about this act, about which you can read some at Nuganomics.com. And there's a picture of a noted deputy here in Chattanooga area, Mark Kimsey. It was my art element for that story. And my concern is that I want Mark Kimsey to have less work to do, that he will enforce only the statute in the driver's license and transportation code only upon people involved in transportation and not on everybody else, which is what he does, pursuant to Sheriff Jim Hammond's continuing rejection of my administrative notice given to that department and the county in March. Dick Marple's bill is Right to Travel Act, and it was voted as inexpedient to legislate for several reasons. We'll hear from him about what happened. One point was that of it being a troublesome bit of legislation was that, according to the chief extortioners of that state running in the executive branch, it would have cost state government $200 or $300 million in lost revenue because of the non-enforcement of the transportation statute against people not involved in transportation. It's a big issue here, Dick Marple, because we have one of the two recent noisy arrests of minority people, females, in Chattanooga was a transportation stop. And because a woman who had maybe a bad tag or a suspended license, she is a criminal and is to be dragged from her car and thrown to the ground. That is how grievous transportation offenses are in the minds of police officers who act summarily and with great execution routinely here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. So, Dick, tell my listener what is the Right to Travel Act and what is the main premise behind it?
The right to travel existed before governments were created. Governments do have the authority to have jurisdiction over the commercial use of the highways. And we pay, I don't know what your tax is on gasoline in Tennessee, but there's a federal tax and a state tax. These taxes that we pay for gasoline for our automobiles, and there is a distinction between the automobile and the motor vehicle. The motor vehicle is, and is defined by the federal government as a commercial vehicle, one that's used on the public ways as a medium of, in other words, commercial use, a medium for collecting revenue. In other words, you're using the highways for profit and gain. That the government has jurisdiction over. But the government has absolutely no jurisdiction over your automobile, which is defined as consumer goods. It's consumer goods under the Uniform Commercial Code. And that you will find it in UCC at Section 9 of the Uniform Commercial Code. Section 9, you go to Section 102, which is the definitions. And if you go down to subparagraph A and subparagraph, which is definition, and you go to subparagraph 24, that defines the automobile as consumer goods. So consumer goods is also defined in the UCC at 9-109. So in other words, the automobile is distinct from a motor vehicle. So we're talking about semantic subterfuge. That's what the government is bringing in the revenue. And I mentioned it last time, it's RICO for revenue. RICO, they're running a RICO operation to bring in revenue. They have no authority to do it because they don't have any jurisdiction over the automobile.
What would your bill have done? Talk about the provisions of your bill.
What it would have done is it would have, and again, if people want to continue to contribute, that's what they can do. They can do it. They're not prohibited from continuing to contribute, but they get mandated. They're not mandated. In other words, anybody who wants to withdraw from paying these unlawful tribute, that's what it is, tribute, for something that is unnecessary. What it would have done would have been, and it's in the bill. If you read the bill, that's House Bill 1778. That's HB 1778 in New Hampshire, and for this last session. And if you read it, you'll see it. All it required was that the motor vehicle department would issue a photo ID, and that's not a contract or a license, just a photo ID exempt under UCC 3-501, because there's no contract. In fact, that's something that you should see. They hook you. I say they, meaning government and their subterfuge.
The good people.
When you purchase a license, they require your signature or autograph. And I do not enter into a contract. I use T as in Tom, D as in David, and C as in conversion. That's what it's: threat, duress, and coercion. If you use those three characters at the end of your autograph or signature, that's not a contract, because you're not agreeing to anything. You're doing it under threat, duress, and coercion. So that's one way you can avoid entering into a contract. Like they give you a summons. You get stopped for speeding or something. They give you a sign here. Or if you do, make sure you put TDC down there. Otherwise, you're entering into a contract and you're liable. So these are the little intricacies that are being played upon the people. What for? Revenue. It's RICO for revenue. And if you go to the federal statutes, Title 18, which is the federal statutes, 1964, is RICO. And you only need two so-called predicate acts. And only two of them. And
well, let's get back to the bill.
Every day.
Dick Marple, I can tell you're a man who loves to go down rabbit trails, and I'm with you on doing that. But my listener wants, since we have quite a bit of discussion here in the Chattanooga area on the right to travel versus the privilege of driving or operating a motor vehicle, and my listener is sort of dying to know more, and he's dying to hear people other than me discuss it. What did your bill do? How would your bill have? How would it have redefined things, or how would it have allowed my listener there to not be part of the system?
Okay, it would confirm that jurisdiction, because government only has jurisdiction over the public ways when the public ways are being used for profit or gain or for commercial use. So if you're driving, going to church on Sunday and they stop you because you don't have a plate, you don't need a plate.
Or maybe your light bulb. Maybe you have a bulb.
You're not using the highway for commerce.
What if you have a bad brake light? That affects the public interest, Dick Marple. Why would you not be stopped and fined for a bad brake light, even though you are a private user, non-commercial?
No, they can't stop you for that because they have no contract to do so.
Go ahead.
I mean, again, there's got to be when they make a stop, they've got to determine whether or not you're using it commercially or not.
Now, they
have no right to stop you. In other words, if you are traveling, I got to give you a little background, because this is going back years ago. After I got out 4 years in the Navy, a first-class petty officer, I went through what is called the Vermont State Police Training Academy, which they had a contract with one of the military colleges up in Vermont. And we didn't have training. I was a peace officer. I was a peace officer for 7 years. We didn't have a speed law. The speed law was reasonable and prudent under the conditions and having regard for the actual and potential hazards then and there existing. If we stop somebody for speeding, you gave them a father-to-son talk, say, hey. And that's what it is. I used to use a rubber band. And I stretch it. I said, here, this is the law. And I'd stretch it. And I said, you don't want me. And then I'd actually break the rubber band and say, that's breaking it. We're going, and that's what I use. In other words, you don't go belligerently at the people. You try to educate them. And that's what it is. It should be education and not the revenue producing that they're after now. And it's millions of men. This is going on in every state in the union. Every state in the union is collecting license tags for non-commercial vehicles. And they shouldn't, because there's no authority for it. In fact, the UCC, which is the UCC is now the standard commercial action in every state. Why? Because there's no lawful money. I mentioned before to you. Let me give you his name again. His name's Melvin Stamper. Stamper. Mel Stamper happens to be a very erudite individual. He was a Marine, and after he got out of the Marines, he was a police officer, police chief actually, and then he was a railroad agent. He was in CIA intelligence. He was an industrial engineer, a pilot, a law professor,
Dick, get on with it.
Private investigator, Dick, all in Florida.
Dick, get on with it.
He's written a book, which I call it my Bible, and I would recommend it highly. You may be able to get a hold of Mel and have one. Fruit from a Poisonous Tree.
Fruit from a Poisonous Tree. We're talking with Dick Marple.
Poisonous Tree, okay. Melvin Stamper. I believe he's living in Florida now. But he also authored another book previous on the Federal Reserve, which again is the foundation of all of the corruption that the states are operating on now. What? No lawful money.
Now, getting back to your bill, Dick Marple of New Hampshire, your representative, your bill would have said if you're involved in commercial use, you have to have a license plate because that shows you've paid a tax for the use of the road and a tax on that car or truck as a motor vehicle or as a motor carrier. But other people, like my listener who just tootles about, goes to church, goes shopping in his car, goes on vacation in his car, he would have a non-commercial tag issued by the state. That makes it very clear to the officer.
Not a tag. That of course, they manufacture those at the state prison. What they have is a decal. If you read the legislation I proposed, it would be nothing more than a decal, which would be on your windshield, and you would have the so-called photo ID, which would have on that you're exempt under the UCC.
And so when the officer approaches the car, there are always some signals being given off. He sees that it does not have a plate if your bill had become law. So that means that probably he's thinking this is probably a private person, but if that person was going really very fast, so since I have turned my lights on and I have arrested that person, I'm going to go ahead and follow through, speak with him from the car window, though he's a private person because the tag is not there. So what happens then in that traffic stop, Dick Marple?
Well, you don't need a tag because it's not being used commercially.
So the officer would have he would have no probable cause. So in other words, Dick Marple, the officer would have no probable cause to stop that car unless he had a warrant for that person's arrest or he saw a crime.
Probable cause.
Okay.
What's the probable cause? There is none.
Right. And that's
the fact is, if they give you a summons, they've got to prove before a magistrate that you were using that for commercial purposes. And that's the first thing you should challenge. I'm not using it for commercial purposes. There's no jurisdiction. They don't have jurisdiction unless you are using it for commercial and a profit and gain.
Let me ask you a question. Here in Chattanooga and Hamilton County, I'm pushing what's called administrative notice, making it clear that the statute in Tennessee and almost all the case law, even court opinions that rule against the constitutional crank like you, even those opinions have language in it making the distinction between travel and transportation being the commercial use or the for-profit use. Do you think there's any prospect of my project working to bring about reform? Because now we have unrebutted notice for months now from these local agencies. They've not changed their practice. They are continuing to arrest and stop private people who are unable to really defend themselves. But what would you give as a prognosis for success and reform here?
Here's what I have suggested to others, and maybe your listeners could benefit by it. Every state has what they call right to know laws. In other words, you can requisition from the state. They have to answer you. They have to answer you in 30 days, or there's a penalty on them for failing to answer. Silence is fraud. There's several court cases on that, where if they remain silent, they're committing fraud when there's a duty to speak. So I would recommend that anybody that wants to recover their right, not a privilege, a right, which has very subtly taken from them, is they write a Freedom of Information Act to their motor vehicle department and say, kindly provide the specific statute that requires me to pay for commercial use when I am not using my automobile, which is distinct from a motor vehicle, particularly an automobile. So you specify automobile. There's no statute that requires a tag on an automobile. They got to answer you. So send them a letter. Inundate the motor vehicle department with the Freedom of Information Act. Show me this. Show me the law.
Show me the law. Show me the statute. That's a great question.
Show me state. That's show me state. Anyhow, but that's it. The only way the people and it has to be unified. And I know the more people that do it, then government will change.
Well, let me ask you this: what kind of people are most injured by the driver's license regime and the regime that requires effectively by policy the police departments and sheriff's offices to impose the transportation statute on non-commercial users? What kind of people, what categories of people, Dick Marple of New Hampshire, are the most damaged by that operation?
Shall we say the records? You only have the records. In fact, ours is down this year by over 50% as far as accidents are concerned, including motorcycle accidents. They're all down. And this is it's the same. The more government you have, the more accidents you're going to have.
My listener, Dick, my listener is hearing you not answering my question. So the answer here. Here's the question is, and let me give you the correct answer. The question is, who is most damaged by driver's license regimes and transportation regimes imposed on people not involved in commerce on the road? And the answer is the poor. Do you not have poor people in New Hampshire? You must be a great state not to have any poor people. No minorities there? No Hispanics in New Hampshire, Dick Marple?
Oh, yeah, we have.
Well, are they not the ones most injured by enforcement?
Not necessarily, no. In fact, there's no discrimination as far as accidents are concerned. Accidents are accidents.
Well, but we're talking about enforcement of Dick, I'm talking about the enforcement of the statutes against people not involved in commerce. And those, how is it that we have jails full of people who can't make bond? We have people with thousands of dollars of licenses and unpaid court fees because they have traffic problems, driver's license suspension and revocation problems that they can't overcome. It seems to me that it might be a great point.
Tremendous economic loss to those who are out there doing, but that's how they operate. See, they give you a ticket for $100, we'll say a speeding ticket. Well, most people, they're going to send $100 in because they can't afford to take the time off from work to go to court. So that's what's called a plea bargain, and they bargain it off, and that's why they're raking in the revenue. It's RICO for revenue. It's all economics. It comes down to economics.
Do you think my listener,
someone take off, take an afternoon off from work and lose what they would have earned as they stayed at work when they could send $100 to them and get them?
Well, the fines are that low for a reason. They're that low so that we can have a lot of people moving through the system with low fines, and we don't cause too much pain. If the fines were greater, people would fight back. We don't want that. We want it to be handled in corporation court, in sessions court here, or city traffic court, and we just want to rake in the revenue that way through the fine itself and also through court costs.
Well, we've had, believe it or not only do we have planes, but we have helicopters, and it costs about $6,000 an hour for a helicopter to go up, and then they radio down and have the troopers chase them because they get marks on the highway, mile markers, and they'll see one and they'll clock him for a couple of miles, and then they radio down. It's all RICO for revenue. It's rake in the revenue. RICO,
of course, RICO is racketeer influenced corrupt organization, and you're suggesting that state governments are not above being involved in racketeer influenced organizations?
Absolutely not.
Are you sure?
In fact, they're the biggest. It's unbelievable. You got to read Mel Stamper's book, Fruit from a Poisonous Tree. Please read that because Mel does a fantastic job, much better than I, on expressing this and telling actually what can be done. And he's got a law degree and teaches law. So Mel Stamper.
Well, this is David
Poisonous Tree, and you'll get all the necessary information. More than I can give you.
This is David Toulis. We do thank you for tuning into our program 927. The number is 800-8949, 800-8949. We'll have Chris Dahl on next. He is running for county commission. So if you have a question for Chris Dahl, the number is 800-8949. And Dick Marple, the crankiest constitutional most patriotic legislator in New Hampshire. Thank you for joining my listener and me here at the David Tiller Show.
I welcome any inquiries. They can just, if they go on the internet, if you go to my email, it's NHREP, New Hampshire Rep, NHREP@outlook.com.
NHREP. Again, thanks so much, Dick.
Have a good day. Thank you for calling.
Yes, sir. Thank you. This is David Tiller. Dick Marple is live here. Thank you for joining us, Dick. Hungry for local economy and free market in Chattanooga and beyond. Lovely by local. And the number is 800-8949, 800-8949. The candidate for county commission that we're going to hear from next is a libertarian dissenter. He's a dissenter from the status quo, kind of a reformist candidate. We're going to hear from Chris Dahl.
3, 2, 1.
Chattanooga Radio. Digital FM 95.3 HD4. 92.7 FM's news now.
Chattanooga police say Willie J. Kalakua was shot on Talley Road and he doesn't know who did it. This happened yesterday on the 700 block of Talley Road. If you know anything, you can give an anonymous tip to the police. Early voting is approaching fast, but is your vote safe?